Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me for this regional coach call for our Virginia Tech Regional. My name is Emily Owens, and I'm the state director, and I'm very excited to be returning to Tech for our regional on February 15th. And for those of you that don't know, we actually have both B and C teams for the first time ever competing at Virginia Tech. So we are so excited to be welcoming some new middle school teams to the Virginia Tech Regional, and also then welcoming back many teams in that area on the Division C side. So the agenda for this presentation is going to be in two chunks. It'll be first preparing for tournament day, things that you need to do in advance of showing up on February 15th on the Tech campus. These are things that a lot of it is about like our coach portal and things that you do on the logistical side for Vaso, as well as some suggestions for like how your team can be preparing. And then a bigger chunk of this will be walking through tournament day, especially for our newer coaches, what it's like from the beginning of tournament day all the way to the end. And at the end, I do talk a little bit about state qualification. So, first, everything that I'm pretty much going to direct you to tonight as coaches is accessible in the coach checklist that I had shared with you all. So, just a reminder that a lot of this information is consolidated there for you. So, you can, if you wanted to, literally print it off and check things off as you go. But it has also some good links to things that I'll highlight a couple times, like our resources page, our clarifications page, etc. So, first and foremost, one of the things that you should be doing as a coach, if you haven't already, is making sure that your students have permissions forms filled out. This is separate from if you have like a school-based field trip permission form. This is the form on our Vaso website that parents fill out to give their students the ability to compete in Vaso tournaments. They only have to sign one for the year, so if your team advances from regionals to state, they won't have to sign it again. But it also gives us like good demographic data about who's participating in Science Olympiad. Um, where are they coming from? What grade are they in? How many years are they doing it? Are they returning to it? As well as things like a media release and some other acknowledgments. So please make sure that you share that with your team members. You can check to see who has finished theirs on the Vaso Coach portal. Um, if they've done it, they're going to show up in a list that you can then use to assign them to teams. So if a student doesn't have their permission form completed, they will not be able to compete. So it's very, very important that we have those done and on file. This is also how we, once you make your rosters, how we make our wristbands. So all those pieces fitting together, please make sure that you are passing this along to your competitors and their families to get this done. Rosters for this tournament are due February 7th, which is Friday at 5 p.m. Please make sure that you're assigning them and that you are, like I said, checking in with those kids that you know that haven't filled it in, because this gives us a week to print our wristbands, print our rosters, and get them all ready to bring down to Blacksburg. So when you go on the Vaso Coach portal, the page where you're going to be able to like actually make your team is called Create Your Teams. And when you click on that, there's a couple things that you'll notice. So at the very top, you'll see the regional teams listed. One thing I'll point out to you is that the team names are editable. So please go ahead and change the team names. If you have multiple teams, especially, it's nice to have a little bit of unique flair in the team names. I think they default to like alpha, beta, gamma. So you can change those. You just click in the box. To type in the name that you'd like. And then below that, you'll see assign students to teams, and you'll see a list of the students that have completed your permission forms. In order to add them to a team, there's a column that says regional team. Click in the box that's empty for that student, and it'll bring up the option to edit their regional team. You'll hit select, and then you can, from your drop down, select the team to put them on. You have to do this even if you only have one team, because we know that teams might have extra students, they might have alternates. Or you have changes where a kid was going to compete, now he's not. So we do ask you, even if you have one team, to like finalize your roster to let us know who will actually be there. And along with that, there's a new feature this year in the Vaso Coach portal. And if you've logged in recently, you would have seen it on this yellow banner that it prompts coaches to let us know who's going to be there as the adult in charge. So there's an option for you to indicate that yes, you will be at the regional, or no, you won't be at the regional. Um, Only coaches that have portal accounts and that indicate yes will be issued wristbands on tournament day. So your wristband as a coach is your ticket, I mean, to pretty much talk to Vaso people. That's how we know who you are if we haven't met you in person before. To know that you're a coach, we could talk to you about team issues since we don't normally engage in those conversations with parents and families. So it's also important that you know that according to the policy that was signed at the beginning of the year, that you do have to have a school approved adult that's there all tournament day. So if you as the head coach can't be there, please make sure you're making arrangements with another adult that your school is aware of, to fill that role. And they will also need to create a coach portal account, and tell us how to contact them, and that yes, they will be there on tournament day. Something else to point out that you can do in the coach portal while you're finishing your rosters, if you haven't already, you can sign up for build events. For these events, these are the ones at like the very bottom of the schedule. So for Division B, that's going to be Scrambler, Helicopter, and Tower. For Division C, that's Electric Vehicle, Helicopter, and Tower. If teams don't sign up for these, we don't expect that they're competing, so please sign up in advance so that we can know and prepare appropriately, to be there for those teams at those sign up times. The sign up closes just the day before competition at 7:30 a.m. That just gives our supervisors a little time to prepare, see how many teams signed up. So please make sure you get that done. If for whatever reason there's an issue and something needs to change on tournament day, this tournament is small enough. You could probably talk to the event supervisor and, move things around as needed. But it is helpful if you're able to plan up front, for the like correct times for your students to compete in these events. And so pay particular attention to student conflicts with other events, because we can't move the other events that aren't self-scheduled. So we'd have to move the build events if we can, accommodate and find a time. You can do the scheduling of device testing through the Vaso coach portal. So there's that coach landing page. And so just like all the way to the left, you would click create your teams in order to make your rosters. There's a button that says schedule device testing, and that's what you would click to then select what sessions you would like to test your devices. Note for this tournament that not all sessions are available for all the build events, but those are indicated on the schedule and it's reflected appropriately in the schedule device testing function. Once you've scheduled your devices, I think it's helpful to like make a version of the schedule that you can share with your teams. You can even put student names on it so they know what they're going to and when. That's helpful to share with your team members and your families. You could also add on a bit about like what your expectations are about like what time they should arrive, and the expectations after the sessions are done, all that stuff that is really more team controlled. But just really being really clear about your expectations. And we also want to pay attention to the times of the impounds for Scrambler and Electric Vehicle to make sure that students who have those devices that are going to be transporting those devices are there on time. And I'll point that out in the schedule of when that happens. It's actually during like session 1 of the day, but making sure that the devices are there to be impounded so they don't incur a penalty. But we'll talk more about impound. Also, please make sure in your preparations before the tournament that students have all the necessary materials that they need for their events. For a lot of this stuff, this could be, you checking in with them that they've read the rules and they know what they can bring. But there are some things also that like they are required to bring, and if they don't, they're not allowed to compete in the event. And this is especially true in our chemistry events. So just things to check in with. This is all in the rules, and we're going to cover it in more detail, but they should make sure that they, do they have their chemistry event kits? Do they have the necessary personal protective equipment, like goggles for their build events and for their chemistry events? And then, like, do they have their cheat sheets or their binders that they're allowed to have? Do they actually have their scrambler? Do they have their electric vehicle? Do they have the paperwork that they are supposed to bring with it, etc.? It's a helpful exercise, as much as possible to like review the rules with your team. And this is another way you can do that, like before the tournament to say, okay, let's sit down, look at your events. What are you allowed to bring? What do you have to bring? Making sure you have all those pieces. I would also remind you to make sure that your team members are looking at the VASO clarifications as well. So those are like addendums or modifications to the rules that we run in Virginia, and those are just as valid. They're on our website. So make sure that you're looking at both the national rule book and also VASO clarifications. If your team is traveling, or even if they're local to this tournament, please make sure that families know how to contact you throughout the day. You're their point of contact, obviously, as like if this is like a field trip for your school. So just make sure that they know how to get in touch with you. Okay, so for those of you that are joining us live, are there any tournament day preparation questions before we get into the actual tournament day like walkthrough?
So I had a quick question about the build events
Yeah.
and what students are allowed to actually build the items that are like pre-made, like build. Is it only the students that are coming on tournament day, or how's that work?
Yeah, so I actually have a couple little slides about that, but the gist of it is that any student who participated in building the device just needs to be on your 15-person roster. So if for whatever reason you have a team of 7 students, but there are 3 other students at your school that weren't planning to attend but did help build the device, you just need to add them to your roster. So have them fill out the permission form, even if they're not going to attend, put them on your roster, and then everything's good. So devices that are presented can be built by anybody or everybody on the 15-person team, even if only 2 main people are presenting it. But they can't be built by anybody that's outside your 15-person roster.
Perfect, thank you.
Mhm. Okay, let's walk through tournament day. I will get into more details about the build events and what that looks like in terms of when they submit their devices and what kind of questions they may get. I'll also talk a little bit more about the chemistry events and the things you have to bring for that, as well as, just general written test events. But here is the Division C version of the Virginia Tech regional schedule. The B one follows the same flow of the day, just obviously with slightly different event titles. And both of those are linked directly on the tournament details page of our portal, which is public facing. So anyone can see this. It actually links to a Google Sheet, and that allows us to edit it with room numbers and other information as we get it. I do not expect anything in terms of the timing of the day to change. We will just be adding on room numbers, home bases for teams, etc., as we get that information from the SO at VT group. Some of you may know they had an invitational this past weekend. Some of you competed in that invitational, and so been trying to give them a little bit of, a couple of days of relaxation before I jump on them for the details of their regional. But they did just host a successful tournament this past weekend, and I expect a lot of the same rooms and spaces to be used. So it is going to be in the same area of campus, but they're great about providing maps and directions and parking. And so I will pass along all of that via email to coaches as I get it from their group. But so 9 o'clock is when things are really kicking off for our tournament. That's when doors are going to open, when check-in will begin. Coaches are expected to arrive at the beginning of the day, and they're the ones who check in with us. So individual students and parents don't have to check in with VASO. They just probably need to check in with their coach. The coach is checking in on behalf of the whole team with us. So during check-in, that's when we're going to have you look over the rosters, make sure there aren't any last-minute changes. We will give you your wristbands so you can verify that you have the right number with the right names on them. And we'll give you any other like information, maps, tournament schedules. We'll have shared all of that via email as well, but we'll usually have a couple printed copies available. And like I said, if there are any changes in that information, then we'll have that like printed for you on that day. So, like I mentioned before, just a reminder, the expectation is that the entire time that you have team members at this tournament, that there is an adult school sponsored or school approved representative there. So they're there for the duration of the time that the team is at the tournament. We expect that or like assume that to be the head coach unless we hear otherwise. And that means that, you know, we have your phone contact, we have your email contacts, we can get a hold of you, especially for a tournament like Virginia Tech where we're between buildings, right? It's not all housed in one building. Very helpful to have correct contact information. So please make sure that's updated appropriately in the portal. But if for whatever reason you as the head coach are not the person that's going to be there all day, please make sure that your school is aware of that, that you know who will be there, and that they have a coach portal account so they can get access to the same stuff because there are some features like the appeals portal that you know are helpful to actually have access to on the day of. But we need to know who they are in case we have to contact them. So I mentioned wristbands. That's one of the main things that you're getting when you check in with us. And so just a reminder for those of you that have competed with us before, every student who competes has to wear a wristband, and coaches wear wristbands too. Wristbands are the easiest way for us to know who's allowed into certain spaces, who, you know, is permitted within the rules to talk to event supervisors or to VASO personnel. So as soon as you get the wristbands and verify that you have the correct ones from us that match your roster, when students are coming in to check in with you like at the beginning of the day, you should be putting their correct wristband on them. So in this example, imagine that I have two teams. I have the Wahoos. Sorry, I should have changed it to the Hokies for this presentation. Ryan does go to UVA. He's actually one of my former competitors. Um, so let's say that I have the Wahoos as one of my teams, and then the Falcons as another one of my teams. They're going to have different colored wristbands. So if you only have one team, all your students will wear the same color wristband. If you have multiple teams, each team will have its own color. It will say their first and last name, so please make sure that the right kid gets the right wristband. It will say their school, and it will also say their team number. So this is also great, especially for our teams that compete in a variety of different tournaments and invitationals. Sometimes you lose track of which team number you are that day. It's right on their wristband. You, as the coach, will also have a wristband that says your school and says that you are a coach. So please secure those or help your students secure them on their wrist. They shouldn't be able to slide them off. They're not taking them off all tournament day. And event supervisors may ask to see them, so they should be able to easily show their wristband for verification of who they are and what team they're part of. If they lose their wristband or if they damage it, then there is a way by which you can get a replacement. If it's damaged, but they still have it, they can bring the damaged wristband to us at headquarters and we can replace it for them. However, if it's completely lost somehow, it is a little bit more of a tedious process. The student and the coach have to both come and find the tournament director or if she's there, the state director. And I can tell you at the Virginia Tech tournament, I will be there. I'm going to be at Virginia Tech instead of the Centerville tournament. So you'll have to come find me. You'll have to explain what happened. And I will have to decide if I can indeed issue a new wristband. The reason why we admittedly do make it a little difficult is because wristbands are one of the ways in which we, you know, help ensure that only 15 people are competing for a given school. So we don't want to ever run into a situation where we somehow have 16 kids competing on a team because we issued a new wristband to somebody. But it really was to a new person. So this is how we you know try to keep control of that. So the you know best way to handle this is to just make sure that they're put on them you know securely, snugly in your line of sight as soon as you see the students, and we shouldn't have a problem. All right, so teams will also have a place to actually like congregate so that your students don't have to come to our check-in location. They can just go directly to the home base and meet you there. I don't know where exactly those will be just yet, but I do know that rooms will be given to teams, so teams will all have a designated space or a room to use as a home base. um, and so this is just where they can hang out when they're not actively in competition. And we just ask that, students and parents and everyone who's, traveling with your team be respectful of other teams' belongings if you are sharing a space or in any of the common spaces, like in lobbies that might be like connecting the home bases. Be mindful of other teams' devices and just, spaces that they might have like claimed for themselves. There's plenty of space in these buildings and on the tech campus. So hopefully that won't be an issue. But I do just like to put that out there, that you will be around other teams, and so just trying to keep it positive for everybody. It is helpful, if possible, to have a coach or a knowledgeable adult in the home base area during the tournament, since that's the first place we, can think of to find you, though, of course, we can also call you as well. But, it just kind of makes sense to even to have someone there anyway to be with the materials and the belongings. And, usually you don't have all your students competing at once. But please have your cell phone, at the ready in case we do reach out to you. Um, and then, like I said, we'll also usually try to find you in person in the home base area as our first step to having a face-to-face conversation. We do have a cleanup policy in Vaso. This is applicable to home bases, to event rooms, to really any place on campus that your students may encounter. So just a reminder that teams are expected to clean up after themselves, clean up their materials, clean up their work areas. Event supervisors may give them instructions about cleanup that they are expected to follow. Some events actually specify a penalty if they don't clean up. If there's no specified penalty, we can award, we can give a 5% penalty to the team's final ranking if they don't clean up after themselves, and the event supervisor reports that to us. Um, this could also be a penalty that we enforce if teams don't pick up their devices from impound. Um, after the designated time. And also we can, enforce a penalty on the team's overall score if any of those like public areas, home bases, etc., are not cleaned up. I never want to do this. We unfortunately have had to just a couple times in my years of experience with Vaso. But those instances are few and far between. Generally, we know that you guys take care of these spaces and are very respectful of the hosts. But I just wanted to put this on your radar, especially as coaches, right? That's an easy way to get students to like clean up after themselves, is to point to the impact it can have on a score. Some of the home bases may be in classrooms, which, at the collegiate level isn't really like a high school classroom where there might be a lot of like personal belongings, but there may be like a teacher like desk or like presentation area that we just ask students to be mindful of. If any materials have been left there, just make sure that um they remain untouched. The bigger thing is actually the trash part of it, right? Your team members are probably going to be bringing in food, having lunch maybe in the room, bringing lots of snacks, right? High schoolers love to snack. So we do provide trash bags for teams to use, and so that they're not like overflowing the smaller trash bins that may be in the rooms or leaving trash behind. It is also helpful, especially if some of the tables are movable in the room, that you take a picture of the room when you first arrive so you could just like return it exactly the way it was when you leave. This is something that we also do when we enter rooms and find it to be very helpful. So would encourage you to do that too. Okay, so that's the check-in part. That's like 9 o'clock. You've checked in with us. You've gotten the wristbands. Your students have the wristbands on them. Things are about to begin. At 9:30, the first session begins, which for Division C will be with experimental design, but you'll notice that there's something else happening at the same time, and that's impound for electric vehicle. It's also impound for the Division B event Scrambler. So, for those of you that have not ever competed in other Science Olympiad tournaments, impound is sometimes in certain schedules before the beginning of session one, but because the Virginia Tech tournaments are a little bit smaller in size with fewer teams, we were able to build a schedule where it can take the place in session one, and makes our day a little bit shorter. Why we can start at 9, which is actually a little bit later than some of our other tournaments where doors open at 7:30. So let's talk about what impound means for your students. So, like I said, this is for Scrambler in Division B and Electric Vehicle in Division C, so our vehicle events. If you've attended invitationals or you qualify for the state tournament, there are other ones that are impound events, but for this regional, it's only those. What impound means is during that time block, so from 9:30 to 10:25, sometime in that time, members of your team need to bring their device, bring their vehicle and all any other required items per the rules to the event supervisor for the event supervisor to hold onto those things in impound until the designated device testing block. This is done to make sure that all teams have that it's a level playing field, right? Because for some of these events, there's a key piece of information that's withheld for the tournament day until impound is over, like a distance, or in other events like a target time or something like that. And so we ask teams to impound their devices so that teams can't practice with that information and gain an advantage if they go later in the day. So impound helps make things fair. So it's really important that students read the rules for Scrambler and for electric vehicle so that they know everything that they're supposed to bring to impound with their device. If there's any tools that they are going to bring, right, the rules may specify that they have to bring all those tools. If they're going to be referencing practice logs of any kind, they need to bring those. For electric vehicle, it'll specify that when you impound your device, the battery has to be detached, etc. So that all of that information is very clearly laid out in the rules about what they're supposed to impound. They don't have to impound. Well, there aren't goggles in this event, but impound events don't require you to submit your personal protective equipment ever. So don't worry about that, but look at the other stuff in the rules. They also need to bring a pencil or something to write with to impound. They won't have to leave it there, but they actually just do need to write their names on some stuff for us when they submit their device. Now, let's say, for example, that you have a student in electric vehicle who's also in experimental design, and that happens at the same time that impound happens. It doesn't need to be the exact students who will be competing in electric vehicle. It could be any members of your team that could bring their device to impound. So they're not going to be asked a ton of questions. They just had to fill out a piece of paper that says, their names, their school, etc. The questions will come later. So when that later happens, that's in the block of time that you signed them up for. So teams sign up for a general session block. They'll return at that time. So even for events that don't have impound, you still have a sign up time. And there's no set order for teams in that same block. So let's say 2 teams sign up to test their tower in the same time period. The event supervisor will probably just ask if which of the teams wants to go first or whoever's there. But it is best practice to show up at the beginning of the device testing block, so that you don't miss out because some of the other teams, um, went later or something and you really needed to go earlier. Um, but like once the event supervisor calls your team or you volunteer to go in your testing block, testing of the device is not going to take more than like 15 minutes. They're going to ask you some questions. They're going to talk about your device and like your choices of design and modification, etc. Right? Things about the event. So this is obviously when it does need to be the kids who built the device, who are the main builders, the primary builders who are, submitting this for competition. So we expect them to be knowledgeable about how they constructed it since they built it. And then they may just have some like, yeah, general questions about practice, anything that they want to ask really about the build. They might measure the device. They might have already done that if a device was left in impound, but for others, they'll measure it while they're there to make sure that it's compliant with construction parameters, right? The rules outline very clearly, like the dimensions, the max dimensions, or sometimes the minimum dimensions of a device, and just making sure that it fits within those parameters. And then, of course, there is the task itself, so that students will be completing that. So, like I said, they need to make sure that they're bringing their appropriate safety equipment. So there are no goggles that need to be impounded for like electric vehicle. But if you're doing tower, you absolutely need goggles, and that is very clearly written in the rules. So bring their personal protective equipment with them for device testing. And then, of course, if it wasn't an impounded device, they have to bring the device itself and any other materials with them. So it's making sure that they're prepared, especially for this tournament, since they are walking between buildings. We don't want them to have to, run all the way back. So if they're familiar with what they're going to have to bring with them in advance, that preparation will pay off and save them a little bit of time. The device testing for helicopter, for electric vehicle, scrambler, and tower is going to be open viewing for the public. So parents, coaches, other spectators all can watch, other team members can watch. These are the only events that are open for viewing. No other events, even ones that have a device like wind power, those are not open for viewing. So these are the ones that are your chance to see your team in action. Speaking of the goggle part of things, right? We don't let them compete if they don't have the right goggles, which would be kind of a bummer. So in the rule book, it does list the categories of goggles. And so pretty much for the build events, what we're going to be looking at here are category B goggles. These are goggles that need to have a high impact safety rating. So they're going to be marked with a Z87 plus. They have to have that marking on them. Event supervisors are trained to check for that marking to make sure that they are wearing the appropriate goggles. If they don't have that marking on them, they won't be allowed to test until they find goggles that do comply with that. So, if you, as the coach, are packing their goggles, just make sure that you have ones that have that rating on them. If your competitors are bringing their own goggles, I would encourage you to have them bring them to practice, an earlier date so that you can check them and make sure that they are compliant. Some other things about builds. I actually talked about this a little bit earlier in the presentation in response to a question, but just a reminder that devices that are presented for competition can be constructed only by members of the 15-person team. Okay, this excludes alternates. So there's a couple different implications of this. One, let's say that you have two teams. Team A can only construct, like the members of Team A can only construct a device that's used by Team A. They cannot build any of the components for Team B. Team B has to build their own device. All 15 of them on Team B can contribute to building this device, but none of them can build anything for Team A. Now, of course, they can talk about ideas, just like mentors can talk about ideas, but they cannot physically build any of the things for another team. Another implication of this, let's say that you have a student who was on the team and then they've dropped out. and they're no longer going to be competing, but they helped build your electric vehicle. Unfortunately, if they're not going to be on your roster on tournament day, you cannot use that device. Your team cannot use that device unless the builders of that device are on your 15-person tournament day roster. So keep that in mind as, things may change, as students, realize they might have other commitments. The names of all the builders of those devices have to be on that team's roster. If they're not, the device is ineligible. If they are working with mentors, that could be, parents, coaches, teachers, etc. No, none of those people can construct anything on the device ever. They can, of course, train them how to use tools, oversee them to make sure they're using them safely. They can't construct any of the actual competition device. Okay. And if there's ever an instance where your team members can't do the task safely, they can't use a tool safely, even with training, then they need to find a different way to do it. It's not acceptable to then let an adult do it for them, for the sake of safety. Instead, find a different alternative, safe route for students to do it themselves. They should be building devices, designing and building devices that are appropriate for their age group and for their skill level. For some of our events, there may be tools permitted to be brought in during the competition time or like impounded with the device. Just know and have your team members know that they can't use power tools during that time. They should not expect to have access to using power tools. And if an event supervisor sees them using any tool inappropriately, they can ask them to stop. So they should only bring tools they feel comfortable with, that they know how to use, and they shouldn't be ones that are power tools. They can use power tools to construct it before competition. They just won't have access to them during the competition time. A lot of these policies also that I'm discussing, as you'll note in the slides, like if they're underlined, they link to the policy page on our website. So all of this is easily accessible to share with competitors and families that way too. Some more about our construction policy. So I mentioned that you could have any members of your team impound the device, right? Anyone can submit the electric vehicle or the scrambler. However, during the actual competition for the session that they sign up for, we expect the device's builder to be there, the primary builders. So let's say there were like 4 of your team members who like all on the same team who contributed to building this electric vehicle. We expect that at least one of those 4, ideally the ones who had the most, input and ownership of the device, are the ones who are then signed up to compete with that device. And that's so that they know how to use it. But also like they can answer the questions of the event supervisors who may ask them about the design and construction. If we think that the students who presented the device maybe weren't so much like involved in the construction, we may ask to talk to other team members. But it should be a primary builder, right? You can have other people on the team help build it, but some of the main builders, right, need to be the ones actually like using it for their device that they're submitting. I mentioned already that parents cannot construct anything on competition devices, and that if their student can't do something safely, they need to find a different way to do it. That is one of a couple different key points of what parents are not allowed to do. So, parents are also not allowed to test devices, to assemble them, or to calibrate them. We see this unfortunately every season where we end up having to disqualify or highly penalize a team because we see a parent working on a device. So these devices should only be, transported and used and calibrated by the students. When the students are competing, parents should not be entering the competition area. They should not be interfering with the event in any way or offering advice or coaching from the sidelines. This can also result in a penalty if event supervisors do see this happening. They should not be touching or taking pictures of another team's device. If they wish to take pictures or video of their own team's device, that's permitted, but don't be surprised if event supervisors like stop you and ask what team you're from, ask the students who are competing just to verify that you are actually with them. Because we do want to like preserve the integrity of the designs of the hard work that students have put into their devices. So we do verify that the people filming and taking pictures are indeed only for that team. Parents should also not contact Vaso directly, or necessarily like want to talk to us directly at the tournament. We mainly talk to the community through the coaches. So we encourage you to set that boundary with parents that if they have any concerns, they can bring them to you, and you can relay the appropriate ones to us as a state organization, whether that's on tournament days or anytime in the season. But parents can absolutely, be there to support. They can watch the devices being tested. They can support in other ways as well by, chaperoning, driving, getting food, etc. We want them to show good sportsmanship. We just don't, want them to be too involved and cross any of those lines with our team competitions. So I mentioned that when students do submit their device to be tested, that they have to bring a pencil because they have to fill out some stuff. I just wanted you to see that it really is a small amount of information that we ask them to fill out. It's their school and team name, the competitors' names. We ask them to sign and verify that it was only built, in compliance with that construction policy, excuse me, by that 15-person team. And there's a couple questions on there about, did they use a 3D printer? Did they use a kit? That's not a bad thing necessarily. That just helps us direct the questions that our event supervisors may be asking. This is at the top of the page for every checklist that we have for our build events. So the checklist that we use to evaluate and score devices, these are actually already available on our Vaso events page. And so we strongly encourage competitors to take a look at these checklists. They can even practice with these checklists to see exactly how they're going to be scored, what kind of things they're going to be, evaluated on. It's all in the rules too, but I do feel like the checklists do a better job of like outlining it in a way that our students could, like peer evaluate in preparation for a competition. While they're on the Vaso events page, they should also be making sure that they're familiar with the Vaso clarifications that impact their events. There are a handful of them for our various build events and even some for our written test events. So making sure that they know exactly what has been published about those events so that they're not surprised by those additions and amendments to the rules. If your team has competed in invitationals prior to this regional, I do just want to put a big reminder out there that just because a device passed a given invitational doesn't automatically mean that it's compliant for regionals. Judging is more strict at regionals. We train our judges. And we are not responsible for the standards of invitational tournaments. They might have let some things go. They might have been more lax on some things. So preparing using those checklists and measuring things yourself and really drilling down into the exact details that the event supervisors are going to use is, I think, the best way for students to avoid those tournament day surprises where they realize that their device wasn't actually within the construction parameters. So they've shown up with their device, they brought everything they were supposed to with it, they competed with their device. After they're finished testing their device, students can take it with them. They could take it back to their home base, take it to their car, to the bus, wherever. The only reason they would ever leave behind a device is if they intend to file an appeal. Appeals can only be initiated by you as the coach or by our event supervisors. They cannot be initiated by competitors or parents or mentors. So if your students come back to you Or if you were there watching, right, they may say, we think that this rule was not followed or was not applied correctly. We want to file an appeal. They should leave their device with the event supervisor when that's happening. And it's actually one of the questions that we ask on our appeals form. So appeals are filed online via the coach portal, which is why it's so crucial that the coaches who are going to be present at tournament day have access to the coach portal, because this is the only way you can file an appeal. So the button for tournament day appeals, you click that, and it will take you to a page. It's going to ask you some questions, which I'll talk about here in a second. But I just want to reiterate that it's coaches who file appeals. So some high school teams do have student leadership accounts in the portal. They do not have access to the appeals. It has to be the adult coach. So please also make sure that your contact information is correct in the portal. You're actually going to get email alerts when there's an update to your appeal in there. And then if we can't find you face to face in your home base, we'll try to call you. So make sure that the phone number is correct on file. So this is what the appeals page looks like. It has a description at the top about like what is an appropriate appeal. So we ask that before you appeal that you please go back and revisit the rules. So it is also helpful to have access to your rules, if you have them on your laptop or you've printed them out, something like that, because we're going to ask that you revisit those as well as our clarifications and make sure that you as the coach and the students personally understand the rules that you're going to be submitting an appeal about. Okay, so a successful appeal has to say that the event supervisors broke a rule or that your team's testing conditions were substantially different from other teams. So that's why it's important to know the rules so that you can then say which ones we broke and how. Okay. There are a couple examples given here of unacceptable appeal justifications. It is not acceptable to say we didn't know about this rule or this rule doesn't apply or the test was too hard or something like that, okay? Those may be frustrations, but they are not appealable, okay? You must file appeals within an hour of the particular incident happening. So we do track that in the system. So please be mindful of that window. And so if you can access, the coach portal on your phone, you can submit appeals on your phone. We do ask a couple questions that require typing, like, what's the rule that was broken? What's describe the scenario, describe your solution, etc. But there will be other questions like, did you leave the device in impound if it was a device event? That's the big one. It'll ask for, obviously what the event was and things like that. Okay. But so all of that is done online. So please make sure that you have a way to access the coach portal during tournament day. So that takes care of really what to expect for all those bottom events: electric vehicle, scrambler, helicopter, tower. Those device events are going to be happening throughout the day. And they are, differently structured than the other events. The rest of the events happen at set times in the schedule. So again, this is a Division C schedule. There is a comparable, similar Division B schedule. But for each of these events, they're happening exactly once at the tournaments because we have one session for each event with up to 10 teams. And so please pay attention to what events are happening at what time. So, in Division C, experimental design is only happening once and it's in session 1. And then there's also important overlap between events to pay attention to. So anatomy, astronomy, and optics are all happening at the same time in session 2. So please make sure that you're not double booking any students by assigning them to both astronomy and anatomy. They'll have to pick one. We don't make changes to the schedule. But you'll see those time blocks are about 55 minutes each, and there's like 15 minutes in between the sessions to account for like having to walk between buildings on campus. Those 55 minutes you should expect to be in the events for like that whole time. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're figuring out like what the day is going to look like. So like I said, event times are determined by team number. It's pretty easy at this tournament because all Division C teams will be participating at the same time. We don't move teams to different session times to accommodate late arriving participants or any other conflicts. It's one and done at this tournament, so those changes won't be made. Okay. And that's true for any tournament anyway, but especially for this one. Um, and like I said, most events will utilize the full session time. So participants are expected to be there right at the start to get important instruction and to be there the whole time. I've said it once, I'll say it probably 5 more times. Please make sure teams are reading the rules before they come to competition. And in this context, I'm talking about making sure they bring only their allowed materials. If their event allows a binder that they make, that it has all the things hole punched and put actually in the rings. If it says they can bring a cheat sheet, is it one sheet per person or one sheet per team? They should read to find out. Okay. There are important details that they should be paying attention to for those items. And they're different for every event. So they should be looking through the event rules with their partners and making sure they understand exactly the conditions for each of their events throughout the day. I mentioned bringing a writing utensil to impound. They should bring a writing utensil to all events. So make sure that they are just always carrying a pen or pencil with them. Of course, there are other things on top of that needed for events, but at minimum, you're going to have a hard time taking a written test if you don't have a pencil. We've highlighted a lot of things in this video, in our reading the rules video, which if you haven't watched it, I strongly encourage you to watch it. But don't ever just rely on us. Please make sure that you and the competitors are reading the website, reading the rules, reading the score sheets and checklists, read the rules again, do it as a team. And then check those clarifications that are posted on the VASA website for all events, because there are some that impact written events. One of the additional items that teams are often allowed to bring for events is a calculator. So in the rules for a given event, it'll say what calculator class they're allowed to bring. And then in the rule book, it's page C72 in the C book and B71 in the B book. There's a one-pager that describes what we mean by those classes of calculator. So for example, a class 2 calculator is a scientific calculator. It's not a graphing calculator, but it has more functionality than just like a 4 function. Okay. So if an event allows for class 2 calculators, students are permitted to bring class 1 or class 2 calculators. They'll just be at a disadvantage if all they bring is a class 1, which is a 4 or 5 function calculator. They absolutely cannot bring a class 3 calculator, which would be a graphing calculator. They would not be allowed to use that. And no events allow for class 4 calculators. They cannot use their phone as a calculator. Okay, so just make sure that they are equipped appropriately with the calculators that are permitted for their events. They should not assume that graphing calculators, which are, what a lot of our students have, are allowed in all events. There are many events that do not allow that. For our chemistry events, there are some additional things that they must bring with them and some additional things that they're allowed to bring with them. The chemistry events that are happening at this tournament are potions and poisons for Division B, and then in Division C, it's Chem Lab and Forensics. So for these events, they do complete a paper-based test, but there is also a hands-on lab portion that happens at the same time in their assigned session. And since this has a wet lab component, students must bring their required safety equipment with them. If they don't bring it, they're not allowed in the testing room. They are not allowed to just say, oh, no, it's fine. I just won't do the lab. No, they can't come in the room at all. So make sure that they have the appropriate PPE and that they're wearing the appropriate stuff. So chemistry events in their rules say like you have to have closed-toed shoes, you have to have long sleeves, you have to have your hair pulled back, you can't wear super tight pants, like you can't wear leggings. All of those things are part of the safety precautions, as well as bringing goggles and aprons or lab coats, which I'll talk more about. In addition to those required safety pieces, students can also and are encouraged to bring a kit of equipment for each event. And so that's in the back of the rule book, and I'll show an example of it. So they don't like they're allowed to compete if they don't have the kit, but they're going to be at a disadvantage without it. So in the back of the rule book, this is the Division C page on C71, but there's one in the B book for their events, which is B70. You'll notice that there's columns listed for the different events. Anywhere where there's an X, students are allowed to bring that item in a kit in a box to the competition to use in the lab stations. If it doesn't have an X, they're not allowed to bring it. So like for chemistry lab, they're allowed to bring graduated cylinders, but forensics they're not. So you can't just like use the same kit necessarily for the two events. Like they do have different things permitted. You do not have to bring everything on the list. And in fact, if your students have been practicing these events, they shouldn't be bringing everything on the list. They should know what things they use, especially forensics, like what things they like to use. So they don't have to bring all this stuff. But even within like where it says beakers, 50 to 500 milliliters, that doesn't mean you have to bring every size of beaker in that range. It's just saying that's what you're like, that's the range of what you're allowed to have. So pick and choose what you want. Okay. So be strategic in how you make your kits. I know it's hard, especially for chemistry lab or potions and poisons, to know the lab tasks that are going to be there, but you don't have to go out and get all of these things on this list in order for them to be successful. They just have to have a couple things that serve those same purposes. So that's what they can bring, right, in the kits. But again, returning to what they absolutely have to bring for these chem events, they must bring appropriate safety goggles. So for the build events, we were talking about how the rating on the goggles needs to be Z87 plus. For the chemistry events, they need to have goggles that fit close to their face and have indirect vents. So they cannot have just like open holes on the goggles. They have to have the vents, which you can see clearly on this picture here. It's like the black knobs, but a lot of them are also like clear plastic. But they have to have those vents. They have to be chemical splash proof goggles. Okay. This page that we've made, this like personal protective equipment guide, it's available on the website on all of the event pages for the chemistry events. So you can like see this exact exhibit. But a lot of goggles that are purchased for school districts, like I know my school's goggles actually are those like chemical splash proof goggles, but they are also Z87 plus rated. So if I bring them to a tournament, they could be used in any event. But just like be mindful of that, that if they're chemical splash goggles, they might not have the Z87 plus rating. So you might not be able to use them for build events. But if they fit like closely to the face and have those indirect vents, you can use them for the chemistry ones. You also are required to wear a lab coat or a lab apron. So when we say lab apron, we mean ones that can like protect from chemical spills, which are usually those like rubberized or vinyl aprons. These are the best protection for any event using chemicals. And so they're going to be the most effective if they extend to at least mid thigh, but ideally below the knee is even better. For lab aprons or lab coats, we expect it to cover the lap area. Um, but certainly to cover the torso. Okay. And if they're wearing a lab apron, they must wear long sleeves to the event. If they have a lab coat, if the lab coat has long sleeves, then that is sufficient. Okay. Okay, so I know that's a lot of information, but a lot of it really does boil down, especially for those event-based ones, to read the rules, read the clarifications, go over the rules with your team members to make sure that they know exactly what they can bring, exactly what the scope of the event is. But to kind of summarize like what your role is for tournament day as a coach, at the beginning of the tournament, you're going to do check-in with us so you can get your wristbands and confirm your rosters. During the tournament, you're just available to your team and families for questions. You're there to file appeals on behalf of your team if something like that comes up. You can watch your team compete. Okay. But there may also be times where we're, wanting to share information to teams. And so, like, you're going to be the point of contact for us to do that. So during the day, you are the team connection to Vaso. After the tournament is done, you're responsible for helping your team clean up, and then you get to stay for the award ceremony. And we hope that you do stay. It's a fun time. Okay. We do share info with coaches before tournament day that includes, like a contact number for us in headquarters, or like how you can reach us if that need arises. And like I said, we will also be in touch with other specifics for Virginia Tech, including maps, schedules, food options available in the area if you're less familiar with the campus and the surrounding area. Um, and anything else that the SO at VT group wants to share with you. So we will be in touch with more of those specifics. So this was meant to just give you more of that information about like just how a tournament goes and knowing what to share with your team, especially for new competitors or new teams as a whole. But so I mentioned we hope you get to stay for the awards ceremony. Awards is at 5 o'clock. So we hope that that works well with people's schedules if they're having to travel, that it is a shorter day so we can get to awards early. And so I don't know yet where awards will be, but like I said, that will be part of the update on our documents as we talk to the SO at VT group. And here's what you can expect in the awards. So for the award ceremony this year at Virginia Tech, the top team in Division B in each event will be awarded a medal, and the top 4 teams in Division C in each event will be awarded medals. So those are presented during the award ceremony to the students, so they can, put them over their heads and wear their medals proudly coming out of the awards. And then at the end of the awards, the top B school will be awarded a trophy, and the top 2 C schools will be awarded trophies. These schools will also be the ones that are invited to the state tournament. Okay, so a reminder that schools qualify for the state tournament as a whole. So if you have multiple teams, it's just your top team that would be, what gets you qualified. But if your school is in that situation, you do not have to send only those exact 15 kids from that top team. You can send a whole new group of kids. It's just your school qualifying for state. So students don't individually qualify, teams don't even individually qualify within a school. It's just the school qualifying. There is one exception to how students can qualify individually in the case of our gold bid policy, which I'll talk about. But I also wanted to point out that all of this, like the state qualification, is only comparing teams at the Virginia Tech regional. So you're only competing with teams at that exact regional. I know there's another regional happening that day. The Centerville regional is happening in Northern Virginia. You're not competing against them. It's only the teams at the Virginia Tech regional. So I mentioned the gold bid. So gold bids are a great motivator, especially for new teams, smaller teams. We tried them last year and they were, I think, a big success. So we are going to be continuing them this year. So here's what that policy says. If your school does not qualify for the state tournament, but you do have a group of students, have an event team that takes first place, so takes the gold medal in a regional event, those specific students that won that gold medal are invited to the state tournament to compete in that event. Okay. So this is the same example I gave last year because it's a good one. We did also have some examples from Virginia in our own season last year, but this one's from Michigan because we got the idea from Michigan and we like to give credit to them. So let's say that Hazlitt High School is participating at this tournament. Hazlitt does not qualify for the state tournament, but they had a trio of students who took first place in experimental design at their regional. Those exact 3 students, because remember, experimental design is an event with 3 students, most others are 2. But those 3 students who earned that regional gold are invited to the state tournament to compete in experimental design. So let's say Ryan, Chris, and Lauren are the team for experimental design. They're invited. Let's say that Ryan can't go. Okay, I'm not allowed to make a substitution. It's just Chris and Lauren. Okay. So that is one of the very specific caveats of this, that it has to be those particular students. But then when they go to the state tournament, they get to compete in that event. We also allow them to compete in any trial events that we are running. They can earn medals at the state tournament, but they're competing as an exhibition team. So in this example, let's say that Hazlitt earned second place at state. You'll notice that they earn a second place medal, but they don't take away a second place medal from the next team, which is actually competing as a whole school. Okay, so Hazlitt won second place. East Lansing had qualified for state. They have a full 15-person team there. They also get awarded a second place medal. So the gold bids don't hurt the teams competing for a national spot. Okay. But it does give us a chance to celebrate the work of our students who, are really great in particular events, or as I don't have a full team that covered all the events, but they've done really remarkably well in some of them. So we are continuing those gold bids, and we look forward to seeing more of them this year at our state tournament. After the award ceremony, so those are the ones that we announce, but we will put the full results up on Duosmium after the tournament. So duosmium.org is a Science Olympiad results website. If you're ever feeling, like you want to go down a rabbit hole one day, we have years and years of Virginia tournament results on Duosmium, like going back to the beginning of VASO. Here's last year's Virginia Tech results so you can kind of see what the format looks like. So, like I said, we will announce the medals and the top trophies at the award ceremony. We don't announce all the full results, but they'll be up on Duosmium pretty quickly after that award ceremony for you to peruse and share with your team members. All right, I know that was a lot of information. So if you have tournament day walkthrough questions, or really any questions about this presentation or what to expect on February 15th, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm here to answer your questions. I'm here to help you and your team feel ready for competition. And like I said, we're so excited to be returning to Virginia Tech, and especially excited to be welcoming some B teams to competition at Virginia Tech. So, again, please reach out if you have any questions, but thank you so much for watching, for joining us. Check us out on social media. We are also usually pretty active on tournament days on Instagram. If your team wants to share any photos, please tag us. We often reshare on our story. But again, we look forward to seeing you on February 15th at Virginia Tech.